Welcome to this audio-visual presentation for EDET 630. The topic presented in this presentation addresses the information and examples needed to really be able to perform the skills indicated in the course objective 1.1, which is to be able to define the term or the concept educational technology and state its goal as a field of study and practice. Now, you have an entire textbook associated with the definition for educational technology. It's presented on nearly every page and with lots of elaboration and discussion. So I have no doubt that you will be able to define the term well when it comes time for testing it in some capacity. You have an entire book, one whole book for one definition. It's just a good thing it wasn't too expensive, I suppose. The objective also addresses you stating the goal of educational technology as a field of study and practice, and we will be investigating that a little bit further in this presentation as well. Now, a big picture for the course is presented on the website, and it has some specific regions that address different parts of the definition for educational technology, the definition that is presented in your one book. But it's really, really important when you're processing everything that's in the book to consider a very basic assumption, and that is learners come into this world and there are a lot of things that they don't know how to do very well. And then after some amount of time and interaction, after processes are experienced and resources are used, then learners are capable of doing something well. In this case, we have a little baby coming into the world with an inability to read. I'm sure that's very true and common for most of us, perhaps not all, but can't read well, and then within a few years' time, 5 or 6 or 7 years' time, and again, certainly following a lot of processes and using a lot of resources, many people can read really well by the time they're 7. I think it's absolutely fascinating, I have to tell you. I think one of the most fascinating things in the world is to consider how much a little tiny baby within the first few years of his or her life actually learns through processes and resources. And I just think it's fascinating. And again, the field of education represents the study and practice of those processes and resources. And one really important thing to consider is that as adults functioning in the world out there, you are and I am an expert already in learning. I asked you to communicate to me and to the rest of the class some area in your life something that you could do really well. And we had some really interesting responses. 4 of us, myself included, described cooking as something that we could do well. There were other interesting things: raising bees, breaking down complex technical tasks, being able to speak multiple foreign languages, being a people person, traveling. I thought those were just some great examples of things that people have learned how to do really well. And in your elaborations about these things you learned how to do really well, you described, at least most of you described, the processes, some processes you went through in order to be able to perform those skills well. Probably most importantly, practice as the process, but also resources. I asked you to consider the people that were involved in your learning, and for the most part, most of you included a description of some of the people who were part of that learning experience. Probably the most important media you'll ever interact with in any learning experience are other people in some capacity or another. But you're already experts. But the goal of educational technology isn't just to study the processes and resources associated with facilitating learning, but it's also improving the effectiveness of learning experiences by manipulating processes and resources. And so that's a really important point to consider, is educational technology is committed to improving. And improving is needed, I have to say. Here's a picture of a classroom that I got off the internet, and I'm not sure where it was taken, when, or even what subject is being addressed in the class. But just this picture alone speaks to a lot of processes that do not mirror very well, I'm certain, the processes that you were involved in when you were learning how to do the thing really well that you communicated. You'll notice that in this particular picture, we have learners who are very isolated. They're sitting in rows. They're in a room that is not surrounded with messages that seem to be very conducive for learning. As a matter of fact, there's a sign on the wall in the back that says, "Success is a do-it-yourself project." And I find that rather interesting, because I can't think of a time in which I was successful, not at least since I've been a grown-up out in the real world, where it was a do-it-yourself experience. In fact, I'm quite certain that it's really the opposite. However, the classroom certainly mirrors that sentiment, I would say, quite well, and quite unfortunately, I might add. There are lots of things that you can do in terms of processes and resources that can improve a learning experience. Technologies, as they are sort of defined in the real world, that is media, is one thing. But just presenting media, just having media in a classroom doesn't mean that anybody is going to benefit any more or less from it. A really good analogy for this, and it was mentioned in one of the course readings, is the fact that television has changed quite a bit in the last 60 years, both the media itself, the medium of television, as well as the messages that are presented. But certainly, it hasn't made big inroads in terms of teaching and learning experiences, not informal classroom experiences. And that's because many teachers haven't necessarily learned to apply techniques. And one of the important ways to couch what technology really means when you are referring to it in the teaching and learning environment is technique. In fact, those two words can be very synonymous. And the word technique sort of speaks to the need for some physical thing like media in order to apply methods to working with bees, or cooking well, or playing video games well, or even being a people person. These are all techniques. Being able to do those things well are all techniques, and yet they all require, they are all applied to physical things, and so that's a really good way to consider what the definition of educational technology is, and the fact that we need to improve the effectiveness of learning experiences by developing technologies, both methods as well as media, is certainly the entire focus of this class.